Hi, I'm Katie, and this is Monumental, a small show about the big things God does in the lives of ordinary people. Today, Sebra Baker joins me as guest co-host. You'll remember Sebra from Season 2 and the interview we did with her on hospitality called Hold It All with Open Hands. If you haven't heard that episode, I'll just say, in her early years of marriage, she and her husband Stephen lived in a goat barn and then moved to a teepee.
Teepee first, actually.
Teepee first. I was going to ask, did I have the order right? Teepee first, then goat barn. All right, just to intrigue you, now you can go find that one. Well, today, Sebra and I are here with Rachel Knipp, along with her husband, Pastor Josh Knipp of Bloomington Bible Church. Welcome, you guys. We're so glad that you're here today.
Thank you.
It's really good to be here.
We are so happy to have Rachel with us today to share her story of her struggles with debilitating anxiety that started for her at a very young age. And she's also going to share with us the work that God has done in her life and how He has changed her and brought her healing and growth in this area.
And we're happy to have her husband Josh here with us too. We invited him on because he plays a significant role in Rachel's story. It's just really helpful to hear how God uses husbands and wives to sanctify one another. And in Rachel's story, God used her husband Josh really significantly to help her in this struggle with anxiety. And I think vice versa, He used you, Rachel, to also help your husband and prepare him for, in many ways, for ministry.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we'll get into that. So let's jump in. What was your first memory with your struggle with anxiety you said as a child?
Yes. I actually don't remember the first time I was anxious because honestly, it was just such a common part of my life for as long as I can remember. But the first instance that I can remember that I would place early on was just a simple time when my best friend at the time, my elementary school best friend, was coming with her mom to pick me up to take me to her house for a play date for the afternoon. And I was excited to go. I wanted to go. I've been there many, many times. It was 3 minutes from my house, but I got in the car and something about that, which was unknown to me at the time, set me off on overwhelming anxiety. And so, the heart's pounding and my mouth gets dry and feeling almost like a heart attack sensation in my chest and nausea. And I just knew I had to get out of that car. That's all I knew. And so we were still in my driveway. So I said, I totally forgot. My brother has a t-ball game that I told him I would go to. And I just hopped out without another word and I left. And I left my friend, you know how kids are, probably.
Yeah, like, whoa, what?
What happened? And my friend is no longer coming to my house.
Did they ever come back to it or they just
never
took the story? And,
no. But I also had several other instances with her. And I think a little bit more normal of an experience for kids. I went to her house for an overnight and my parents had to come get me very late at night because I couldn't stay any longer. And I think that seems more normal. Kids have a hard time staying the night at other people's houses. But for me, it was such a normal part of other parts of my life too, that looking back, that was just an instance where I was just overcome with anxiety and had to leave.
How often were the occurrences for you?
I think they were more and more often the older I got, definitely. But as a young kid, I don't think it was very often, although it was often enough that it was a fearful thing to know that at any time it could come up. I had a very happy childhood. I was generally a happy kid. But as I got older into middle school, things just started to increase. And I would go into a situation and have what I learned to call a panic attack later. I would have a panic attack in a situation, and then that type of situation from then on was an anxious situation for me. So if I had a panic attack in the car with other people other than my family, then from then on,
being in the
maybe
car.
Not every time, but frequently, that would be a time where I would think, is that going to happen again? So then the more things that happened with, the more situations became fearful.
Right.
That became a history with me. I have a history in a movie theater, so then I'm going to maybe that will happen again.
Right.
So I need to avoid that at all
just wanna
costs.
Avoid.
So you can see how that can snowball quickly.
Yes. Yeah.
But
did your friends know? Did you say anything to
I
your
didn't say
friends,
anything. If I know myself, I told them I was sick because that was what I always said, unless I had another logical explanation. But the most common explanation was that I was sick.
Is that what you thought? I'm sick? Or did you understand this as like, I have severe anxiety and I don't want my friends to know? Or
I think when I was young, like elementary school age, I did not know what it was. But it was very familiar to me, so it wasn't shocking in any way. It was what I had always experienced. But I didn't have words for it. I didn't have explanation for it. I just knew that I had to get out of these situations, and an easy way for a child to get out is to say they're sick. So even though I didn't think, well, physically I am feeling sick, so this is what I'm going to say. It wasn't really a logical connection there. It was simply a lie to get out of it. But then as I got older, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, I think I knew, okay, I'm anxious. I didn't have a good word for it because anxiety did not fit my experience in my mind. It was way too strong. But I knew that it was similar in some ways. So that's what I probably would have been able to explain to somebody if I had wanted to. But I did not want to tell anybody what I was.
Yeah.
But
you were very much wanting to keep it.
Yes, I just never want to be the center of any attention, and that's just part of my personality. It wasn't a fear that they would judge me necessarily. I just knew that would bring a lot of attention, and I did not want that.
So how did that affect, did you go to school? How did it affect school?
I don't think it started affecting school until high school. I was, having anxiety at school regularly starting in high school, to the point where I was late there was one year I was late for school almost every day because my parents had to coerce me into getting up, eating, getting ready, and we need to go. There was nothing going wrong at school. I had nothing in my childhood that was bad. No mistreatment or traumatic experiences. I had nothing. I was not bullied. I was not bad at academics in any way. The only thing that was bad about school was that I had been anxious there before, and I might be anxious there again.
Yeah.
So that was the only thing. And being trapped at school when I was anxious would be bad. So I wanted to avoid that. So I would be late to school. So I basically almost flunked my first period class that particular year. And my parents must have just been at their wits' end. And then there came a point that same year where I refused to go to school. I would not go.
For how long? Like, you were...
It was 2 weeks in the end, and I don't know why I went back, but I think being at home was helpful for me during those 2 weeks. And so I think that I wasn't anxious while I was at home during those 2 weeks. And it gave me time to calm my system down. What
did you do during those 2 weeks?
There were some hobbies. My mom would always say, you need a project. And she knew I needed to be busy and not just laying in bed, which I would do. So she would get me a new cross-stitching project from the craft store, and I would sit in front of the TV with my parents and cross-stitch. I remember that in the evenings, and it was calming. There was a gift in that. I don't know that I should have been at school for those 2 weeks. Maybe that was a benefit, but I can only imagine my parents' dismay that I was skipping school repeatedly.
Was that a planned 2 weeks? Like, okay, I think I need to just stay home and I'll go back in 2 weeks. Or was it just a day-to-day decision?
It was a day-to-day decision, and I think my parents must have known not to push me harder than they did, because I don't remember them saying you were going and a fight or anything. They were very gracious to me, and I don't remember what made me go back at the end of 2 weeks, but it must have been the motivation that I knew I had to go back. I mean, people go to school. I had to go. I must have just needed that time to calm down and be willing to put myself back in that situation again. And I know my mom was planning ways to help me, and she would say, okay, today we're going to get in the car and then we're going to go back in the house. And then the next day she would say, okay, today we're going to get in the car and drive to the mailbox, and then we're going to go back home.
So
And
sweet.
very sweet. And the time and the energy to do that when she had a job and other kids. And then, so finally the last step was to go drive to the school and go walk up to the door and touch the doorknob and come back in. And I want to honor my mom for that. And it was so loving. It didn't help me much just because those things at that time weren't fearful. I knew I was going straight back home.
Okay.
So I wasn't taking steps of harder and harder, actions.
Yeah,
I was
but you
just
could-
doing that to please my mom. But
Yeah.
but it was her
But she
heart
was
for
right,
what else
it
can
was
we do
something
here?
Sort of tangible you could work towards. And,
Yeah.
Worth
Yeah.
the try.
Definitely worth a
Yeah.
try.
And there was something just about being at home that was comforting.
Definitely.
You
Yeah.
know, that was much preferable to anything that would trigger anxiety, which didn't have a pattern at home.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so home was the place of escape.
So you wouldn't have anxiety or panic attacks at home over different situations?
I never really did that I can remember until maybe college when I realized, now I would be looking forward to things that I had to do and being anxious at home about the future.
yeah, sure.
Definitely. But in my childhood, my earlier years and high school, I never was anxious at home. And it was definitely a safe refuge for me.
So did you go to counseling or did you end up going to get help in some way?
Yes, I think in high school they took me to a counselor, just a secular counselor. And I remember doing that regularly for most of my high school years. Well-meaning man who was just a sweet older gentleman who had some helpful things that if I would have taken them to heart would have been helpful. I wasn't apparently ready to hear them. Like he would just ask me, what is the worst thing that could happen if you get on that bus to go on this marching band trip, which I was wanting to do but afraid to do every time. And he would just say, what's the worst thing that could happen? And that's a very good question to ask and to have to answer and to grapple with. But I wasn't ready to find comfort in that. So, and he also would just say, your anxiety or your panic, that's what he diagnosed me with, panic attack disorder, which was a good word in my mind to use because panic was just a very strong word that gave the importance to all of these terrible things that I was
the feelings.
feeling. Yes, it was strong enough that I felt satisfied. Yes, that describes me. And attack was seemed accurate because I was never thinking very much. I was never thinking, what if what if a gunman came in here and I couldn't escape? There was no thinking like that.
Yeah, it just hit
It hit me like as if something was attacking me, and I had no precursor of thought, no precursor of. Very rarely did I have things that I was actually anxious about, other than getting anxious. So to me, panic attack was very accurate.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was not a helpful thing to me, simply because that was a diagnosis that was to be, I was told this is the way I would be for my entire life. There was nothing to be done.
Sounds really hopeless.
Yeah.
It was, other than medication, which they put me on, which did not help. So, yeah. So he would say to me, just let your panic rest on your shoulder. If you're walking to a room, just let it rest there. You can walk into the room with your panic sitting on your shoulder. And
Okay.
and even at the time I knew, I don't really know what's helpful about that.
So did you continue to go to him throughout high school, or was this just a one or, a couple time?
I think I went for several years. And, you have to go. If you're on medication, they want you to be going regularly. So I must have been going at least twice a month or something like that. And I remember one thing is that they would not talk to my parents, which I think must be a privacy concern. But I know that my parents just what are you learning? What is he telling you that's helpful? And I had nothing to tell them. Then nothing was helping me in the slightest bit. But that's all we had. That's all we had.
You did not grow up in a Christian home?
That's right. So none of my family members were believers. But one thing that is just that I can look back and see how God was really protecting me and shaping me and helping me was that I had the Bible. We were always in church. It wasn't a Bible-believing church, but we were in church. There was the Bible. I owned one. I read it regularly. I prayed the Lord's Prayer every night religiously before bed because I thought that was going to be a part of my my religion, that I would be going to heaven when I died if I prayed this prayer every night. But at the same time, that was not a biblical way to think about it. But at the same time, I had God's word in my heart in that way. I read it. I learned the Bible stories. And I had a very moral home, very stable home. My parents loved me and they were present. And my mom stayed home for most of my childhood until I was in high school. So that was a huge way that God protected me, helped me. And he gave me a childlike faith long before I had a saving faith. And I consider that a great gift.
Yeah. So when did you become a Christian? And how did that happen?
Yeah, so when I went to college, which obviously was a fearful decision.
It's a big deal. Because were you going to be moving away?
I moved
from college or into a dorm?
Into the dorm, which was 20 minutes from my home, but this was still a big deal. This was the only college that I would consider because it was my hometown.
Okay.
My dad worked on campus, but still was a very fearful decision to make. But when I went to college, I believed I was a Christian. So I signed up for several different Christian organizations. I was very social, always wanted to be around people. So I started going to 2 Bible studies, so 2 separate Christian organizations, but I would do all of the things. And so there was one Bible study that I was involved in my freshman year that was trying to teach these freshman girls who, they all thought I was a Christian because I knew all the language, wanting to teach us how to share the gospel. So they would draw, it was the bridge illustration, and they would draw it for us. And, all the other girls were, oh yeah, I could tell somebody about this. And my mind was just a foggy when I looked at this paper that they were describing. I did not understand what they were saying at all. It was very just Greek to me, nonsense. What are you even talking about? Yeah. But it was the gospel. And I thought I was a Christian, and I didn't even know that they were talking about salvation. I couldn't even grasp it that far to know that that's what they were trying to tell me. So they took me out in the hallway and tried to explain it again. And I just finally I pretended that I knew what they were talking about, but never. No,
I think I got it.
Sure. Yeah. So that's the point where I can look back and say, okay, clearly I was not a Christian then. But then in my other Bible study, when they were teaching us to share the gospel, it was something I could read. All I had to do was read a tract to other people, and that would be sharing the gospel with them. So I kind of understood that I can read this to people and maybe they would believe in God, I guess, was what I thought. But
explain all these things.
Yeah, I didn't have to draw a picture. I didn't have to comprehend what I was saying. I just had to read it.
Just read it straight.
So I would share the gospel with people that I didn't really know what I was doing at the beginning. I didn't really know the purpose, but it seemed to be what everybody thought we should be doing. So I did that. And somewhere in there, God saved me. And I don't remember the day, but I do remember the faith building in my heart and my soul, and understanding the Bible like I had never understood it before, understanding this thing that I was reading. And finally at the end of my freshman year, I looked back and I thought, I was not a Christian at the beginning of this year, but I am now, definitely. So, and I praise God for that.
So did that have any impact then on the panic attacks becoming a Christian? Was there a correlation in your mind between those two things for you?
I definitely remember thinking this is the end of my anxiety or my panic attack disorder. I have Christ. I am saved. I have this newfound just relationship with God that I have never had before. So I'm not really going to struggle very much. I knew I would have a little bit of anxiety, but I just thought this will be the end, pretty soon. But it was still enslaving and still just such a huge part of my life. And so then I just thought, well, I guess it's not just going to go away. And then I didn't know what to do at that point.
Yeah.
Did you talk to anyone in any of those campus ministries or any other Christian friends during that time about your struggle with anxiety?
I think as I started to understand it more, and once I became a Christian and I knew that Christians need other Christians. And so I definitely talked about it way more, and I was able to tell people, I'm anxious, or I'm having a panic attack. A lot, just, everybody kind of knew that was my struggle at that point. And that is good. That's a good thing. And it was good that when I would have just overwhelming moments or days of anxiety, my roommate my second year was such a sweet girl. And she, at one point, it was hard for me to walk down the hallway to use the bathroom just because I had to leave my room. I didn't know anything other than I feel better in here. So I wanted to stay there.
Your dorm room kind of became your new, what had been
home,
the safety zone.
A home base. And so she came in and saw that I was struggling so much, and she made me a little, mac and cheese cup that you can make in the microwave, and sat me down, and she gave me the spoon and said, "You have to eat this. I'm going to sit here until you eat at least half of this."
So was not eating a common thing or connected, to your anxiety? I
think if I could sum it up, big picture as a kid and into adulthood, my main thing, my main idol, what I wanted more than I wanted anything else, was physical and emotional comfort. So that's like big picture. But where it came down to me personally was that I did have a struggle with low blood sugar. And that was a physical, real thing that I had. And symptoms of low blood sugar are kind of mimicking panic. So a lot of the times, when I look back, either it was a true situation where I didn't eat quite the right things or quite enough, or it was perceived that I didn't eat enough or the right things.
Was that something you found out as a child?
Yes.
Were your parents aware of this need for you?
Yes, I did. I was tested, and the doctor did say, yes, she has low blood sugar. Just, here's how you manage it. And so that was something that was real, but it became far more than just that. I mean, instantly, because my desire for physical comfort was so strong, I was terrified of letting my blood sugar go too low. I was terrified of passing out more than anything. So it's definitely a pattern in my entire story of feeling like I need food, whether I need it or not, just to keep from having any symptoms of low blood sugar.
So do you carry food around with you generally?
All the time. All the time. Never would I have been without food. Once I started to figure out that was a real need, I always want it. Any situation where I thought I did not have access to food in some way was almost, instant panic attack. So that became an enslaving part to the story. And I think it was around that time when I got to the point where I was so anxious, the point where I had to work up the courage to walk to the bathroom, that I called my dad and just said, I can't even get down the hall to the bathroom. And he said, I'm coming to get you. So he came in. He just was no questions asked, I'll just come get you. And he worked on campus. He probably was there. He probably was there in 5 minutes, Wow. So
you went home for a while?
So I did basically the same thing I did in high school, sophomore year. And I went home and I didn't go back the next day for classes. And I stayed home and cross-stitched or gardened, or, my mom said, you need a garden. So I would plant my flowers and do my cross-stitch, and, there was no texting, so I wasn't in contact with my friends at college, and they must have worried about me some. But, and it was about 2 weeks, and I don't know what made me go back again, but I wanted it enough. I wanted to do, mostly wanted to be around my friends enough that I would go back, and I did.
Just keep thinking, what a sweet mom.
Definitely.
Thinking of these different things to try to help you.
Yeah. My parents were amazing. They didn't know what to do necessarily, but neither did anybody.
Yeah.
Nobody had any thoughts of how to help, but they did everything they could.
So now that you're a Christian, did you think that, and finding out, okay, becoming a Christian didn't just solve this problem for me. Mm-hmm. Did you think then of going to a Christian counselor or a pastor, or did you get involved in a church?
Yeah, I was in a church from the beginning of college. It was the campus church where everybody went. But because I was there, I just thought, oh, okay, so I'm a Christian. I should see. So when I called, they put me in contact with what I believe was their counselor for whoever, the whole college campus could have access to her, but it was primarily for the church. And so I went to her, and I very quickly stopped going to her. I thought, this is the place I should go. This is Christian counseling. This is what I need. I don't want to go to a secular counselor anymore. I really want a Christian counselor. But she was very unsure what to do with me, simply because I didn't have anything in particular that had happened to me that would cause me to fear. So she said, I'm sure that you had some abuse occur in your life that you have covered up in your mind to where you are protecting yourself by not remembering it. And I knew that wasn't true. And praise God, I just didn't go back. So I went several times, but there was no help there. Right. So clearly that was more hopelessness. Yeah. And now I have a Christian counselor who can't help me. Yeah. And I didn't have any knowledge that maybe I needed to talk to a pastor, or, that wasn't part of my reality. So
sure. Yeah. So then when does Josh come into your story? Would that be next up, or?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Here I come.
Just my knight in shining armor.
Right. So you guys, did you meet in college?
We did. So we went to high school together. I was a year older, and we never met in high school that we know of. But we had.
I TP'd her house in high school one time.
True.
I think that's how I won her heart many years later.
Before we met. Yeah. We had overlapping friend groups. So later we found out that was funny. Something that he had done. But
that was the source of her anxiety.
Right, yeah. It was after this she went home from high school for 2 weeks.
No. But so we got saved the same year before we met, and I think we both, the way I tell the story, you may tell it differently, but I think we both wanted to go back to our family's church. His was maybe his aunt's or his grandma's church. Mine was the church I had grown up in, and kind of save our churches because they were not biblical churches. And so we had gone. And
I wasn't that smart yet. I was just going to help, and I thought I was supposed to be in a church.
Okay. So
you probably were ahead of me in terms of godliness, wisdom, and discernment.
Certainly. So I kind of went back to my church that I had grown up in and wanted to save them all. So I was the youth leader and was teaching those kids. And he knew he wanted to be in a church.
Yeah, I was a highly qualified, 19 or 20-year-old youth leader in our church too.
Yeah, brand new believer. Yeah.
I was excited about Jesus. I really was.
Yeah, we both had a lot of passion. Yeah, that's true. So we were both leading the youth of these churches, and our churches happened to be friends. And so when our youth kids went to church camp, we stayed in the same, massive cabin and met there. And And then our youth kids wanted to continue that. You know, we had this awesome week of camp, and they wanted to continue that. So they suggested we do a Bible study together.
Okay.
So Josh and I...
You guys were like, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there were 2 other young ladies, and myself and Josh led a Bible study for our youth kids for about a year.
Yep.
Okay.
Before we started dating. So we really got to know each other really well through that time.
Yeah, so we began dating in July of that year, must have been 2003. And we had known each other for a year. Yeah, I mean, I was in love with her, and she was amazing, and in so many ways. And this area of fear, we didn't understand yet. I didn't even really understand it much yet at this point. Right at the point where we were thinking about dating. I knew it was there. That's all I knew.
What had you seen of it?
I don't know that I had actually even seen it.
I was a master of hiding.
Yeah, I think she was very
fear.
good at hiding it. So I think it was just maybe one of our friends mentioned it to me. I do remember when I asked her out. This is going to sound really terrible, but I remember when I asked her out because I knew the fear was going to be a thing, and I knew she would be terrified of actually going to a restaurant with me because it was already terrifying. It wasn't just the thought of dating, it was the going out to a restaurant. And so I knew that was going to be a thing, but I was like, we need to talk.
Yeah.
It's like we need to kind of talk and kind of clarify where we're at and what we're thinking here,
Yeah.
And so she tried to get out of it, but I knew it wasn't because she didn't want to actually do it. And so even then I was like, Rachel, you're not getting out of this. We need to get together and talk, which just sounds terrible.
You can't say no to me.
Yeah, right. It just sounds awful, but if I had just let it go, I don't know what had happened. So there was already kind of overcoming the obstacle a little bit,
Yeah, sure.
just to...
Yeah, he called me and he said, let's go to Panera tonight. And I said, I have plans. He said, I called Danielle.
You're going to tell this much detail.
Yeah.
This is great. Yeah, go ahead.
I said, I have plans. He said, I called Danielle. I canceled your plans. She wants us to go out.
Yeah, but Danielle knew we needed to talk, so she was part of it too. It wasn't
she
I
was.
just totally canceled the plans.
No,
she was
no.
like,
She
you
was
guys
like,
need to
oh,
get together
yeah,
and talk.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
And then I said, I'm sick.
Yeah.
And he said, you're not getting out of this.
So you really were anxious about going to a restaurant with him, or was it both
just-
of those things,
It was,
or was it just
combined.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely combined.
Yeah, so it was going to be doubly worse kind of thing.
I mean,
and I knew that.
Yeah.
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 I was nervous about the talk, for sure.
Yeah, I don't really know how we would have really got around it at that point.
Right.
It was...
Yeah.
So anyway, we talked, and then we began dating.
So you got through.
We got through that.
Made it.
Yeah.
He came and got me, and I went.
And we had a great time.
Was it
talking.
helpful to you having somebody just be like, no, you're going to do this?
Definitely. I mean, I wanted to go. I just was terrified. So for him to just say, I'm coming anyway, I'm going to pick you up.
We should say Panera was her favorite place. And
Yes.
so it was...
Yeah, he picked Panera
You
because
knew
I
you were
liked
picking
Panera.
I was trying everything I could to make it as comfortable as possible, just with what I knew at the time.
Yeah.
Was that the first time that anyone had just said, no, you need to do this? You're not going to get out of this?
My mom is pretty strong. She would tell me, you're doing this, but I was a rebellious child, so I didn't always do it when she said that. Whereas with Josh, I wanted, and at this point,
Motivation was a little
I had the motivation to go ahead and do it because I liked him a lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, do I want to be with Josh or do I just want to stay home?
right, yeah, the motivation was there.
Yeah.
So
I'll risk the fear.
yeah.
It's really fascinating. You were willing to risk the fear at that
Yeah,
point.
if you want something bad enough, you will go through a lot
Right.
to get it. So
Yeah, and this will matter later, but she had a list of reasons why she would not date me, and and this one's really funny. She had a list, so she probably had already lost already.
You were trying to talk yourself out of it.
I was.
Yeah, but the funniest thing on the list was he's emotionally constipated, Which
At the time
had a lot of truth to it. I mean, I didn't understand my emotional reality, and that is important for part of it, as we get along in the conversation here. I mean, that your fear was actually really helpful for me helping you through your fear, and how God, kind of used me as a part of this. The thing that was helpful for me, at least in part, was kind of raising my emotional intelligence level quite a bit. So God used that so that I'm not as emotionally constipated anymore.
True. Very true.
So maybe the forcing her out on the date was part of the emotional constipation.
Yeah. I was like, I'm trying here, but I don't know. This probably was like the most understanding way to pull this off.
But God used that. So.
Yes. So pretty early on, we were pretty serious pretty quick because we had known each other for a year. And pretty early on, he just told me, if we're going to talk about marriage, we have to get this figured out first, meaning my fear and anxiety. So that was a pretty big wake-up call. But I knew he was right, so that began
It
our
also
search.
shows that you still had hope that you could get better, despite all the counselors you'd met with telling you, sorry, this is the way you're going to be.
Well, it really took him saying that. And I remember thinking, okay, I had maybe a 10% hope that we would find some help. But I've basically run the gamut. But I was willing to try.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't even really I had been a Christian maybe 3.5 years at this point. I had heard some really good Bible teaching. I was not yet in a good church. I didn't quite have that figured out yet. But I had heard some good Bible teaching, and at the time, primarily through the radio. And we were just working through normal conflicts of dating. But I remember one night kind of sitting there talking and just thinking, this whole thing just screams fear to me. And this is where God's mercy really intervened. And I don't quite remember exactly how this transpired, but we had found a church that taught the scriptures. And we knew after we visited one time, we were dating and looking for a church. We knew we need to find a church that's really going to help us and a place where we can be a part of. We had come to know that. But really quickly, maybe a few, 2, 4, 6 weeks after being there, they had a biblical counseling ministry. But for her, she's feeling like, okay, but what? I've tried everything. And so the only thing I could think was, well, why don't we just call and see if you can get into the counseling ministry there and see what happens. They got us in quickly, but it wasn't really even us at that point. It was kind of you. And
I was going to ask, did you both go together, or was it just...
Initially, I started going myself, and I did most of my initial counseling alone. And then when we got engaged at Christmas time, then they brought him in with me, which was a huge help. Of course, I was sharing everything with him after each session and trying to tell him how he could help me and how we could grow through this. I had always called it a panic attack disorder, and what I was experiencing was panic. And I would use the word anxiety because that helped people. They understood that. But in my mind, that's not really what it was. It was so much more than that. It was so much, it was different than that. So I sat down the very first meeting with this pastor, who was to be my counselor, and, I think initially, very early on in the conversation, he just said, so with what you're struggling with, would you describe that as worry? And I just wanted him to understand what I dealt with. I wanted him to know the severity. So I said, no, absolutely not. It's not worry. And he said, would you describe it as anxiety? And I said, no, because that I knew I had to have him understand. And he said, would you say it's fear? And immediately when he said fear, I just thought, oh, yeah, fear. It sounds...
That one resonated.
Yeah. I had never... I don't think... I had been calling it anxiety sometimes, but I don't think I had ever thought of the word fear. But that sounded strong enough. It sounded severe enough. So I said, yes. And he said, the Bible talks about fear. And that was the moment that I thought, oh... I could.
There's hope.
There is hope.
So much hope. And that was, I mean, I'm kind of, we're kind of serious and thinking about this, but one of the real issues was working through her fear to consider marriage and just kind of figuring this out a little bit. And I mean, when she came home and told me that, and it was just like, well, the Bible says, do not fear. So what is it when you fear? You know, and it leads you down all kinds of paths of rebellion, essentially, you know, and it was like, well, it's sin. And it just didn't discourage us at all, because it just put it put it into categories that we now understood. You know, it was like, oh yeah, sin. You know, it's like,
we know about this.
We know about sin. You know, and what did Jesus die for? Sin. So Jesus is with us, and he stands ready to help us now with his truth to battle this fear with truth, you know, with Christ and his word, and we have his spirit, and all of these things were like, all of a sudden it was like, oh, it was hope-giving for me. And then she continued to go, and she worked so hard, unbelievably hard at her spiritual growth. And of course she did want to get rid of the fear, but one of the things that kept saying was, if this is about getting rid of the fear, then that's not good enough. And so she just really worked hard to make it about pleasing God. And she worked so hard at it, and that gave me hope. And so we started, I mean, really kind of gave us comfort to start moving forward with engagement and
to just give a picture of like the work involved. You know, we moved on to premarital counseling at that point, which was under our pastor, who was the college pastor at the time. So 6 months of premarital counseling was almost entirely focused on my fear. You know, that was the main issue at hand. And so he had us, we took the summer that we were engaged, and we mapped out on the calendar. We sat down with our calendar and mapped out each week, I believe, we had something hard to do. And so we, you know, I did not look forward to that summer because all of these things were aimed at things that were so difficult for me. You know, there was a trip to the zoo, Indianapolis Zoo, which was an hour. There was a trip with friends, which doubles the strength, to Chicago, a zoo in Chicago. And those are the only two I remember now. But
so hard things to do, not meaning things to get ready for the wedding. Hard things to do. But
right? Yeah, no.
Things that should have been fun.
Activities that brought fear or anxiousness to you.
Just taking steps of faith to say, I will do hard things to please God, even if I have overwhelming anxiety getting ready to, or on the trip, or whatever we were doing. And I would sit down before an event, and I would just, you know, in my journal, and I would journal questions just to put in my mind thoughts where before there was only feeling. So I would only feel for most of my life. I would walk into a situation, either I would feel fine or I would not feel fine. But there wasn't a lot of thought involved because I had built a habit. There had been thoughts in the beginning, but now there was only habit. And so I had to write down, you know, what is the situation? You know, we're going to the zoo. How am I feeling? Anxious. What am I thinking? Usually nothing. I'm thinking I don't want to go. I'm thinking I hope I don't get anxious. I'm thinking I probably will get anxious. And then, you know, and then the next question, what should I be thinking? And so then I had to write out, what does God say I should be thinking right now? Because there was never thought. There was just feeling. So I had to retrain. It was so much work, but I retrained myself.
Was that the process or the exercises that this pastor counselor gave?
Yes. Counseling,
yeah. So initially that was my first counselor gave me those questions. And so I would just every single week he would say, okay, do this 4 times. I want 4 situations where you write out all of these questions. Okay. And so I would do that homework every week. And so then with premarital counseling, I continued doing that as needed. And the goal was always to get those questions in my mind. I wouldn't have to sit down and write them. I would have them in my mind. Okay, what should I be thinking right now instead of
the habits of your thinking?
One of the other key pieces, other than just want to please God, was how can we be focused on loving other people rather than focused on ourselves and our emotional feelings. And so, I mean, one of the things we were directed to do was always to have 3x5 cards with us. And I remember you always having 3x5 cards, and you had scripture verses on them. And you also, like, before we would go to do something that we knew it was going to be challenging, we would write out like 5 questions that you could ask anybody who would be around during that time that was going to be difficult. And so you would have a 3x5 card with the questions. And I don't remember you ever actually pulling the 3x5 card out in front of somebody and be like, oh, it says
My card says.
how are you doing? But the preparation for thinking about others and kind of beginning to build a habit of others-mindedness in regards to...
because fear is very self-focused.
Right.
So if you can discipline your mind and your heart to be thinking of others wherever you are, that was the goal. That I would write this down and prepare my heart that I would have questions on my mind to ask others to get the focus off of myself.
Yeah.
So helpful.
Yeah, and I had this, pretty thick, key ring of 3x5 cards with all of my verses that were comforting. And I really did pull that out, not in front of people, but before I went to something or even in the bathroom when I was somewhere.
Do you still have that?
Well, funny you asked, because on our wedding day, I was an anxious wreck. I had my 3x5 cards in my hand as I was getting ready to walk down the aisle. So I was preparing to walk down the aisle, but I had them in my hand, and I just realized I can't walk down the aisle with 3x5 cards in my hand. I have to hold my bouquet. So I set them on a bookshelf right before, as you go down the hallway in the church, and I never went back and got them. So, but it is a sweet memory that's where I lost my cards because I had them with me. I had God's word constantly with me to grow in faith.
So then, that really does kind of lead us into the beginning of our marriage.
Yeah, I really felt like I had grown a lot. We had learned so many truths that I was putting into practice daily and had done a lot of hard things and really felt like we were not in the clear, but really close.
But growing.
Growing.
We're growing. Yeah.
And then we got married, and I was very happy to be married. But on our honeymoon, the very first day, we hadn't even spent the night. And I just, we ate some pizza. And of course I was tense. This is kind of, nerve-wracking thing to get married. And I was tense, and I ate this pizza, and then I threw up that same day that we arrived at our honeymoon. And it was about 2 hours away from our hometown.
Yeah, we tried to pick a honeymoon location that was actually reasonable distance because it felt like maybe that would be better.
So we were not too far from home, but when I got physically sick, obviously that is a struggle for me. And I just went into a total tailspin of anxiety, stronger than, well, maybe not stronger, but just longer lasting than ever before. So and
I could tell that this was more severe than probably anything that I had even experienced up to that point that closely. It was like, I don't know how we decided.
I asked, can we go home?
Can we go home? And I was like, absolutely. There's no reason. Staying here at this level of panic, which was clearly evident to me, didn't seem like that was going to be helpful.
Yeah.
Right.
We weren't going to talk this down.
It wasn't a time
and
to just push through.
It wasn't the time to push through. We had done that other times where she jokes with me about saying like, no, we're going to Walmart, but for this, it was like, okay. So we packed up and went home. So we had like a half day.
Yeah. We didn't even spend honeymoon. One night. Yeah. So we went home late at night, and I just spent what ended up being about 5 weeks in just constant, overwhelming anxiety. At the time, I didn't know how long it was going to last.
Right.
So it felt
and
like...
And we were home.
We were home.
Home meaning your apartment.
Our new home. Yeah. So clearly that wasn't a safe place yet, in the sense that it hadn't become my new refuge.
Right.
But at the same time, I had lived there for a month before we got married. So it was fearful to me that I was having this level of fear in my own home. And I didn't know how long, and I thought, is this the new normal? This is very difficult. So,
our pastor was a godsend to us. He had spent endless hours counseling us, helping us. And I don't remember if my pastor just called me then or what, but I do remember talking with him on the phone pretty quickly after that. And he just said, well, Josh, I'm not surprised. And those are just the most comforting words you can give to somebody when you understand their situation.
Oh, yeah.
And it just immediately settled me down
Yeah,
because
me
I
too.
was kind of like, this is so
What is
overwhelming.
going
I thought it was going well.
Yeah.
Why is this happening?
Right. And now it's like, whoa, okay. And he just said, well, you know your wife struggles, and now you have a new apartment, and she's got a new job, and she has a new husband. You know, and
All
so
the big changes.
yeah, and so everything was changing, and that just helped me go, okay,
Yeah,
I
this
at least
is-
can understand that. But
Right.
it was like this 5-week struggle, and I remember one time we were sitting in the living room, and it was so overwhelming, just weeping. I mean, we were sitting on the living room floor. We didn't know what to do, so we were just weeping and calling out to Jesus. And I just remember, this is one of my most vivid memories of that 5-week period. And we were calling out to Jesus, and we were just weeping. And I just felt like this overwhelming sense that Jesus is with us in this. And I remember having that sense so strongly, it like made me weep harder, because it was like the weeping of like the comfort, you know,
Yeah, right.
the Lord Jesus is with us in this, and he's going to help us. And, you know, for kind of 5 weeks, we went through this 24-hour panic attack
Yeah.
with only a minutia of relief. And you were doing your work.
I was doing my work. He would say, let's just,
Why don't
it's
you just
time
go
to go do
journal?
your questions.
Yeah.
It's time to get some Bible verses out. And I would go and I would do that. And I would just be almost just like rocking, trying to get some physical relief from the energy of the fear was so strong.
right.
So, and I remember one day we were trying to just talk after dinner, and I couldn't be seated. I was too fearful to sit down, and I was trying to explain to him how I don't know what I was explaining, talking about something about the day or how I was feeling, and I just had so much fearful energy that I just broke the pen that was in my hands. Like it was just too much, just trying to get it out.
And when you don't know how long it's going to go on, and you're having thoughts of wondering, is this the new norm? Be very scary.
It was scary. And I think it was scary for me just to think about how is this affecting him. And he was just so steadfast and calm and steady and helpful and loving, and never once made me feel bad that this was our first 5, or whoever knows how long this is going to be, but this is our first experience of marriage.
Right.
Is this just fear constantly?
And I think I had confidence that this actually would pass. I remember when I was talking to my pastor, he's like, well, is she working through her journaling questions? And I was like, no. And he's like, well, why not? And I was like, well, I guess I just didn't really think about it.
That was
yet. It's like in the chaos,
get,
that
like,
just didn't come to mind.
Right, yeah.
And so I
You're
needed
much in
his
the middle
help.
of it. Yeah.
And so then that's when, in that period, she really started doing that again
Yeah.
and kind of reworking on good work that was going to help her. And then I had another friend who gave a key word of encouragement. He just said she's never had a stable husband who's strong and who can help her consistently kind of through this. And so he said, I mean, I really feel like there's something about you guys coming together in marriage now that can really help her make significant strides in this. And he said that to me, and I was like, okay, that's my job. This is my job to love her as, and that encouraged me to just be steadfast in this. And it gave me confidence that it wouldn't be like this forever.
Yeah.
If we did what God wanted us to do, it wouldn't be like this forever, and so.
So was there something at the end of the 5 weeks that brought you out of it, or did it just kind of
Well, I think there was a slow improvement, but I do remember one specific instance where, so we got married in October, beginning of October, and I remember very clearly a New Year's Eve party that we were invited to, and I wanted to go. We were going. That was the benefit of marrying a steady man, that we're gonna go, and I wanted to go. But I was very anxious and had been just barely coming out of this just severe period of anxiety. And so I sat down, and I remember, exactly where I sat on the couch by the lamp, and started my journaling questions, and I worked through them, and I wrote out every, answer like I always did. I just was working hard, knowing that I've done this 1,000 times. But this was the first time that as I was working through my journaling questions and thinking of God's word and thinking God's thoughts after him, that my physical body actually responded well. So it was the first time I walked myself back out of fear. So I had done many times all of these things that I knew was obeying my husband, obeying my counselor, and obeying God, doing the work. And I had known that my mind was in order at the end of that, but my physical symptoms were not. And this was the first time that my physical body responded to that and calmed down through the process. So and I knew it right away. I thought, whoa, that's different. That's different. And it was such an encouragement to me, because I thought, because our pastor's wife, who had been also working tirelessly with us and with me, and she had always told me that, you reap what you sow, but, you sow a tomato seed, you don't reap a tomato the next day. So if you sow thoughts of fear for 20 years, you might reap feelings of fear for a little while, even after you start sowing righteous thoughts. So she said, you're sowing these good thoughts and these biblical, scriptural thoughts and truths, but you're not going to reap the physical or the emotional benefits tomorrow. And so
that is so helpful.
That was really helpful.
Yeah. And it was such an encouragement, because I thought, okay, so I'm sowing these thoughts today. I may reap it in 3 months, but I will do it because it's pleasing to God anyway. So
persevere.
Yeah. So I felt at that point, I think I might be reaping something good finally.
Oh, that's so encouraging.
And the habit piece, it was like the habit piece was like broken at that point. The habit that is the word attack, panic attack, was starting to change all of a sudden, right?
Yeah.
It
felt like, it felt like there are thoughts involved here, and God can help me with the thoughts. So I had to just continually think, I'm walking into this situation because I want to please God. Doesn't matter how I feel. My feelings don't matter. What matters is if I will choose to please God right now. And I think that was, looking back, that was definitely the point where I feel like in those few weeks after that I was no longer enslaved to fear. And
you began to see a pretty drastic change going forward.
Yeah. And certainly has been still just a climb or a, sanctification process continually. But I didn't really feel like after that I was regularly enslaved to where I couldn't do what I needed to do because of my fear. But that was definitely a turning point for me.
And then when did you decide to go into the pastorate?
Yeah, so when we went on our very first date to Panera, I had told her even in that I felt pretty confident the Lord was calling me to be a pastor. But I had mentioned that to her, and I said to her, so we may have, if we go along here, we may have to move, someday. And
you said sometimes pastors move frequently. Would you be okay with that? On our first date.
Wow. The first date that was forced.
Exactly. And of course, at the time, even though I knew that would be very difficult, yes, that would be fine as long as I'm with you.
Yeah, right. So definitely that was, in the beginning, that was already kind of a part of this. And then when we were in the church and then growing and serving in a good church and then married, really everything at that point was preparation. The church was starting a pastor training seminary program. And so we were kind of preparing for that. And there was always this question of, how much is Rachel's fear going to affect the work of ministry. And, I remember my pastor saying to me, if your wife is enslaved to fear, as a pastor, that will hinder your ministry. It was straight up with me about the nature of what we could be walking into. But it seemed like she was making so much progress. Like the enslavement piece, I felt like the enslavement piece was broken. It wasn't life dominating in the same way. It's still there, but just not enslaved.
She's actually taking steps to go places that she wouldn't have done before.
And so we had like worked at this. And so, but there were other pieces for me. Like it wasn't just like her fear is going to be a hindrance to ministry. I think for me, I learned womanhood through the process of this, and like the underlying just fears and vulnerabilities. I think I learned what it meant to be an understanding husband through this, whereas like, you're kind of in the beginning of dating and you're both selfish and you just kind of think through the lens of maleness or femaleness, right? It was like, I have to get out. This was forcing me. I mean, her bringing up my issues with, my emotional constipation and I just want you to understand how I'm feeling. And I'm just like, I don't feel. That's actually what I said. Actually, what I said. So that was great for her to hear that. And I began to learn through this constant dialogue, through this reality of like, to be able to understand, like, okay, so you're afraid to go to Walmart. Well, it's not Walmart's the problem. So I began to realize, yeah, man, I can see why. Just feeling trapped in a situation that you can't get out of, if you feel anxiety, sounds terrifying. It just sounds. So
you learn
terrifying.
to empathize.
Yeah, and I learned to empathize with that, and I think I learned sympathy. I think I learned about myself because I learned to see that I have a lot more fears that exist in my own heart and life than I understood before. So occasionally she reminds me, she's like, you have a lot of fears too.
You say you don't feel, but you do.
You have a lot of fears too. Oh, that's what that feeling is. That's what that reality is going on there. Oh, I guess you're right. And so I learned a lot about myself through the process and about my own sin. And so I think I was learning what God's grace is like in his work with us in sanctification. And so, as she grew and I grew, it's actually, I think, just been a tremendous help. So in other words, God redeemed it. The Lord has really used this now for our good and my good. And so now, everyone's not going to get fixed, and everything's not going to change overnight for people. And yet they need encouraged to work at their sanctification, and they need sympathy and they need understanding, but they also need strength. And so all of these kinds of things that I feel like the ground for where it was all developed was your fear. And so the Lord just used it in such an incredible way. I mean,
in preparing you to be a pastor of a church and a pastor's wife.
Yeah.
So you're so much more useful than you imagined doing work that you hadn't even thought.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine it being different.
Yeah.
Like if we had not had that severity, the Lord apparently knew we needed that severity of something to work through to get us to where he wanted to take us.
To be useful to him.
Yeah. I've been pastoring the church for 10 years almost now, this fall. And I mean, we don't talk about fear every day anymore. I mean, it's just not, I mean, it's there for certain things, but I mean, we've traveled all over the country. We've left home we've went a long ways from home many times. It's there. So is mine, but it doesn't rule anymore. And so we're just free to keep loving people and loving the church. And
I would say that I love being a pastor's wife, but I think that it's helpful to me because what is the answer to fear? And that is loving God and loving others. And I have a lot of opportunities to love others. And I love that because that's what's most helpful. And so I love that.
What you practiced.
right
for all those years. That's when you were writing those questions down on those cards. That's what you were doing. You were practicing loving others. And that's what you now give your life to do.
Yeah.
That's really amazing. I mean, she has like people at our house all the time. I don't even know where she meets them or who they are. And she's just loving on them. And it's just really incredible. It really is. It's cool. Really amazing. In a lot of ways, I have just always thought if there's any good that comes from, my ministry as a pastor, in large part, it really is just due to my wife.
This episode of Monumental was hosted by Katie Walker and Sieber Baker. It is produced and edited by Katie Walker, and it is executive produced by Nathan Alberson and Jake Menzel. If you like the show, please don't forget to rate and review in the app of your choice. And if you're interested in more great content, including articles and other podcasts, please visit warhornmedia.com.